In 1943, Lieutenant Robert Mitchell vanished during a critical World War II mission. Decades later, his rusted plane is found deep in a forest, but the truth surrounding his death is far from over. His grandson, David Mitchell, a U.S. Army captain, sets out on a mission to uncover the secret his grandfather died protecting, a conspiracy that stretches across decades and implicates some of the most powerful figures in Allied intelligence. What begins as an investigation into a lost war hero's fate soon escalates into a dangerous web of deception. Who betrayed Robert Mitchell? And why did they go to such lengths to keep this secret buried for over 60 years? As David delves deeper, he uncovers a trail of lies, betrayal, and murder that threatens not only his career, but his life. With every new clue, the forces behind his grandfather's tragic death grow more desperate to stop him. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mystery of Robert Mitchell, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with your friends. Join us on this journey to uncover the truth. David sat at his desk, staring at the military files spread out before him. His eyes fixed on his grandfather's photograph, a young lieutenant with a sharp gaze, lost to the skies in 1943. For 60 years, the story of Lieutenant Robert Mitchell had remained simple. A fighter pilot lost during a reconnaissance mission. No one questioned it until now. His plane had been found, but something felt off. The wreckage, located deep in the Belgian Ardennes forest, was more than just a forgotten relic of war. It was a puzzle, one David couldn't resist solving, despite the growing sense of unease. David had heard stories from his grandmother, Sarah, who always insisted there was more to Bobby's disappearance than the official story. But he'd dismissed her as just grieving. Now it seemed she might have been right. The discovery came out of nowhere. A hiker had stumbled upon the rusted remains of a P-51 Mustang, 200 meters from its supposed crash site. But why was it so far from the reported path? The bullet holes in the fuselage didn't match any known enemy fighters, and the absence of fire damage was equally strange. In combat, aircraft rarely landed in such pristine condition. Something was wrong. David's mind raced. Why had the military concealed the true details of his grandfather's mission for all these years? What was Bobby really involved in during his final flight? He had to know the answers. His fingers hovered over the file marked "Classified Review Pending," the words searing into his thoughts. What had been hidden? And why was the military so desperate to keep it buried? There was only one way to find out. The phone rang, cutting through the silence in the room. David's heart skipped as he recognized the international dialing code. The call was from Belgium. The detective's voice was grave, filled with urgency. "Captain Mitchell, we found your grandfather's plane. It's in the Ardennes. The wreckage is mostly intact. There are bullet holes that don't match enemy aircraft. And we found personal effects, your grandfather's wallet." David's breath caught. This was it. The moment he'd been waiting for, though he didn't expect it to come like this. His grandfather's plane had been found, but the mystery surrounding it was just beginning. "Have you secured the site?" David asked, already grabbing his bag, his mind swirling with possibilities. His eyes kept darting back to the photo of Bobby, frozen in time, a hero whose story was now fractured. "Yes, Captain. But there's more. There's a sealed envelope in the cockpit, along with some photographs and military documents. We haven't opened them yet. It's all marked classified." Dubois' voice faltered for a moment. The word classified echoed in David's ears. What was Bobby carrying? What had he been involved in that warranted such secrecy, even after all these years? The investigation was no longer just about a missing pilot. It was a cover-up. David's thoughts raced. The wreckage was the key. He needed to get to Belgium, but he couldn't go in blindly. There was more at play here than just a downed aircraft. There was a betrayal, and he was about to uncover it. "I'll be on the next flight to Brussels," David said, the decision firm in his voice. His mind was set. Whatever secret his grandfather had died to protect, David would uncover it, no matter the cost. As he packed his bag, his fingers trembled slightly. A part of him was scared. The military's walls had kept this secret for over 6 decades. What if those walls didn't want him to tear them down? The flight to Brussels was long, too long for someone whose mind was spinning with thoughts of his grandfather's last mission. David reviewed the records again, his grandfather's files filled with redactions and unspoken truths. The plane had crashed far from its intended flight path. A reconnaissance mission was supposed to fly over northern France, not deep into Belgium. If Bobby hadn't gone off course, why had he ended up in enemy territory? The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit, but something was off. Bobby's 28 successful missions made him one of the best pilots in the Army Air Forces. A miscalculation was unlikely. There was more to this mission, much more. David's phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Janet Thornton, the head of historical records. File review complete. There are things about your grandfather's last mission that aren't in the standard record. We need to talk when you return. David closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm his racing heart. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but there was no turning back now. He had to find out the truth. His grandfather's legacy depended on it. When David met Detective Dubois at the crash site the next morning, he felt a chill. The wreckage was more intact than he had expected, the P-51 Mustang's tail section and cockpit eerily preserved after 60 years in the forest. No fire damage, strange bullet holes. David knelt beside the fuselage, studying the bullet impacts. These weren't from enemy aircraft. They were from something, or someone, on the ground. Someone was after Bobby's plane, not just shooting it down. Dubois watched as David examined the wreckage. We found the personal effects in the cockpit. Your grandfather's wallet, a few photographs, and the envelope. We haven't opened it. We were waiting for your authorization. David felt his pulse quicken. The envelope was the key. Whatever secrets it contained, it was clear they had been protected for far too long. He needed to know what was inside, what Bobby had been carrying before his death. I need to see everything, David said, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. His grandfather's death was no longer a matter of personal grief. It was about uncovering a truth that could shake the very foundations of history itself. David stood over his grandfather's wreckage, the silence of the Belgian forest surrounding him. The P-51 Mustang's tail was buried in the earth, and the cockpit was half hidden by the overgrown vegetation. Yet it remained eerily intact. Detective Dubois handed him a clear evidence bag containing his grandfather's wallet. David carefully opened it, finding his grandfather's military ID, a faded photograph of Sarah, and a small stack of documents, yellowed and brittle with age. His fingers trembled as he examined the photographs. One was of Sarah, young and smiling, the other a group shot of soldiers at an airfield. There was a man in civilian clothes among them, someone David didn't recognize. "This is unusual," David murmured, turning the photograph over. The man in civilian clothing was out of place. Why was he included in a photo with military personnel? Was his grandfather part of something deeper, more dangerous? Dubois watched as David studied the photo. "We found some other items in the wreckage, too. There's a sealed envelope marked classified. We haven't opened it yet. It's all very strange. We should wait for your superiors." David didn't hesitate. "Open it. Now." The weight of the sealed envelope in his hand felt like a bomb, and he wasn't going to wait. His grandfather's death had to mean something more than just a casualty of war. With careful hands, Dubois sliced open the envelope. Inside, there were military documents, a hand-drawn map with coordinates, and a list of names. Each name was written in pencil, some crossed out, others highlighted with urgency. The last name, Garrett, caught David's attention. The map was detailed, showing what looked like an escape route through a forest. The coordinates matched the crash site, but what was this map? An extraction plan? A covert operation? The questions grew heavier with every piece of evidence. David's mind raced. His grandfather's death had been reported as a routine reconnaissance mission. But this map, these names, they painted a different picture. Had Bobby been involved in something far more dangerous than a simple flight over enemy lines? "We need to dig deeper," David said, his voice firm. "Get me everything you have on this man, Garrett, and this map. Something doesn't add up. I think my grandfather was part of a much bigger mission than we know." Dubois nodded, making notes. "I'll start looking into it. But, Captain, be careful. This isn't just a simple crash investigation anymore. These documents, the map, they're all too sensitive. We're dealing with something far above our pay grade." David clenched his jaw. "I don't care how high this goes, I'll see it through. My grandfather didn't die in vain. Whatever secret he was carrying, I'm going to uncover it." They left the crash site and made their way to the nearby Belgian police station, where the investigation files were being compiled. David sat down at a small desk, spreading the contents of the envelope before him. The list of names, the hand-drawn map, the coordinates, it all pointed to something much bigger than a lone soldier's death. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. The message was from Colonel Janet Thornton, head of Historical Records Review at the Army. It was brief. "David, we need to talk. Come to Dover when you can. We need to discuss your grandfather's mission. It's more complicated than you think." David stared at the text, his heart sinking. What was so complicated about his grandfather's mission that it required a private meeting? He had thought the Army was done with Bobby Mitchell's file. He had been wrong. Turning to Dubois, David said, "I have to head back to Dover. The Army wants to speak with me about the mission. There's something they're not telling me." "Don't go alone," Dubois warned. "These kinds of things have a way of going south quickly. If the military's involved, you don't know who you can trust." David shook his head. "I'll be fine. I'm not going to back down now. I'm closer to the truth than I've ever been." At the airport, as David boarded the plane back to the U.S., his thoughts kept returning to the documents and the list of names. The man named Garrett. David could feel a chill every time he thought of it. Why had his grandfather been involved with someone like that? The flight back to Dover felt like an eternity. As soon as he landed, he rushed to the base, his mind consumed by the unanswered questions. What had Bobby been doing before his plane went down? And why had it been covered up for so long? David walked into his office, greeted by Colonel Thornton's stern face. She motioned for him to sit down. "David, I know you have questions, but I'm afraid the truth isn't as simple as we'd hoped. Your grandfather was part of a mission, one that was classified even after his death." "What kind of mission?" David demanded. His frustration was clear. He had spent so long believing the official story, but now it felt like everything he knew had been a lie. "Operation Nightingale," Thornton replied, her voice low. "It was a secret mission to extract high-value intelligence officers from behind enemy lines. Bobby Mitchell was sent in to rescue them." David felt his breath catch. The documents, the map, everything made sense now. His grandfather hadn't been on a simple reconnaissance mission. He had been part of an operation so secret that even his family had been kept in the dark. "But there's more," Thornton continued. "Bobby's plane wasn't just shot down. He was betrayed. Someone tipped off the Germans. We believe that someone in Allied intelligence was leaking information, and Bobby's mission was a casualty of that betrayal." David's blood ran cold. Betrayal. The one word he never thought would be tied to his grandfather's name. Who? Who betrayed him? Thornton hesitated. "I don't have that answer yet, but I'll help you find it. Just be careful, David. This is bigger than you think. There are powerful people involved, people who don't want this truth to come out." David stared at the file in his hands, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. Bobby hadn't just died trying to save lives. He had died trying to expose a much larger conspiracy, one that had been buried for over 60 years. The journey ahead of him wasn't just about uncovering his grandfather's legacy. It was about facing the shadowy figures who had kept this secret buried, and who would stop at nothing to make sure it stayed hidden. David sat at his desk, the documents spread before him. The story he had uncovered so far was only the tip of the iceberg. He needed answers. Bobby's mission, classified for over 60 years, held secrets beyond his comprehension. His grandfather had been sent to rescue high-value prisoners. But the betrayal? That was the part that haunted David. Who could have done it? Who within Allied intelligence had compromised Bobby's mission? The pieces didn't fit. David's mind was racing, torn between the need to understand and the mounting pressure to let it go. The army had already warned him. This was bigger than one soldier's death. But he couldn't back down. He picked up the phone, dialing the number of Colonel Janet Thornton, the officer who had shared the devastating news. "Janet, I need more details on Operation Nightingale. Who were these prisoners? What was Bobby really sent to do?" On the other end, the colonel sighed. "David, I don't have all the answers, but I've been digging into the archives. We know Bobby was involved in a secret mission to extract officers who held critical intelligence." David's eyes narrowed. "Intelligence about what?" "About compromised Allied operations. The Germans were intercepting our communications, David. Bobby's team was supposed to extract these officers before they were tortured for their knowledge. But someone tipped off the Germans." David slammed his fist on the desk, frustration boiling over. "And no one knew? No one noticed that Bobby's mission was a setup?" "David, we're still piecing it together." Janet's voice softened. "But I can tell you this. There were no mistakes. Someone wanted that mission to fail, and Bobby died because of it." David's mind flashed to the map and the list of names he had found in Belgium. Was this what Bobby had been trying to prevent? He needed to know more. He couldn't wait for the army to hand him answers. "I'll head back to Belgium," David said, his voice determined. "I need to find out who was responsible. If Bobby was part of a mission to expose a traitor, I won't stop until I know who it was." "David, be careful," Janet warned. "These things go deep. You're not just dealing with old war secrets. You're up against people who will stop at nothing to keep their actions hidden." The warning only fueled David's resolve. He hung up the phone and began packing his things. He couldn't ignore the clues any longer. There was a conspiracy, and Bobby had paid the price for it. Now, it was David's turn to finish what his grandfather had started. Arriving in Brussels, David was met by Detective Dubois at the Belgian Federal Police Headquarters. "You've been busy, Captain," Dubois said, leading David to a back room where more files were waiting. "Any new developments?" David asked, leaning over the documents laid out on the table. Dubois flipped through a stack of papers. "We've dug into the coordinates you found. They lead to a small, secretive German prison camp, Stalag 17C. The prisoners there were more than just soldiers. They were key figures in Allied intelligence." David's heart raced. "These officers? Were they the ones Bobby was supposed to extract?" Dubois nodded. "It seems so. But there's more. According to this, Bobby's plane didn't just crash. He was shot down while trying to reach the camp. The Germans were waiting for him. They knew exactly where he was going." David's blood ran cold. His grandfather hadn't just been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Bobby had been betrayed, and now David was one step closer to uncovering who had done it. As Dubois turned over more pages, a photograph caught David's eye. It was of a group of prisoners in Stalag 17C, but one face stood out among the rest. It was the same man from the photograph in Bobby's wallet, the civilian figure who had been in the military photo. "Who is this man?" David asked, pointing to the photo. Dubois studied it for a moment before responding. "That's Major William Garrett. He was one of the intelligence officers assigned to the extraction. But after the war, he disappeared from the records. No one knows what happened to him." David felt his pulse quicken. This man, Garrett, was at the heart of everything. He had been involved in Bobby's mission, and now he was a missing piece in the puzzle David was trying to solve. David stood up abruptly. I need to know where Garrett is now. He's the key to this entire operation. If he's still alive, he could be the one responsible for betraying my grandfather. Captain, I don't think you fully understand the risks you're taking, Dubois said, his voice low and serious. Garrett wasn't just an intelligence officer. He was part of a larger network that was running double and triple operations during the Cold War. If he's still alive, he's dangerous. David's mind was made up. He couldn't back down. Find him, Dubois. I'll do whatever it takes. We need to know the truth, no matter what it costs. Dubois nodded, though there was a trace of hesitation in his eyes. I'll get on it. But David, you need to be prepared for what you might find. Garrett wasn't just a traitor. He was playing both sides for decades. David's stomach churned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His grandfather had died trying to expose a traitor. But had Bobby even realized how deep the betrayal went? And now, Garrett was still out there, hiding in the shadows. The investigation into Garrett's whereabouts stretched into days with little progress. David felt the weight of the mystery pressing on him. He couldn't afford to wait. There were too many lives at stake, including his own. That night, David sat alone in his hotel room, going over the documents again. The list of names, the map, Garrett's role in the operation. It was clear now. Bobby had been sent on a mission that went beyond rescuing prisoners. He was sent to stop a global conspiracy. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Colonel Thornton. David, be careful. We've had reports of increased activity around the Stalag 17C site. Someone is watching you. David's heart skipped a beat. Who was watching him? And why? He had no answers, but one thing was certain. He was getting closer to the truth, and there was no turning back. David sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the phone in his hand. The warning from Colonel Thornton lingered in his mind. Someone was watching him. But who? And why now? His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and suspicion. Every lead, every piece of evidence had pointed back to Garrett, but there was still so much unknown. Why hadn't anyone else come forward with this information? Was Garrett that powerful? David had been trained to investigate, to find the truth, but this felt different. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous the truth seemed. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being manipulated. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Dubois. We've located Garrett. He's alive, David. But it's not as simple as we thought. He's connected to something much bigger, something that still exists today. David's heart raced. This was it. Garrett was alive. But the fact that he was still connected to something larger made David realize how much danger he was truly in. Was Garrett still pulling strings? What do you mean, something bigger? David asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Dubois hesitated. We've traced Garrett's movements over the years. He wasn't just a double agent during the war. He's been involved in covert operations ever since, working for several governments, manipulating intelligence for personal gain. David clenched his fists. Garrett had betrayed not just his grandfather, but entire countries. He wasn't just a forgotten traitor. He was still an active player in global politics. And now he was the one David had to bring down. How do we get to him? David demanded, his determination now stronger than ever. He was no longer just solving a mystery. He was hunting a dangerous man who had escaped justice for far too long. We've been tracking his network, Dubois explained. He's been moving in and out of Europe for decades, but there's a catch. Garrett is protected by people with resources far beyond our reach. If we make a wrong move, we could lose everything. David's eyes narrowed. He had no intention of backing down now. We won't make a wrong move. We need to gather everything. Every lead, every clue. Garrett won't get away this time. The feeling of urgency began to settle in David's gut. He was closing in on Garrett, but the closer he got, the more dangerous the game became. He could feel the walls closing in around him. "I'll meet you at the safe house tomorrow," David said, his voice steady. "We'll make our move then. We can't afford to waste any more time. Garrett's already gotten away with too much." The next day, David and Dubois met in a secure location, far from prying eyes. The tension was thick as Dubois laid out the new information they had gathered. Every detail, every piece of the puzzle was starting to fit together. Garrett's network spanned continents. His influence reached deep into intelligence agencies, government organizations, and corporate interests. He had played both sides during the Cold War and was still pulling strings from behind the scenes. The more David learned, the more he understood how deeply entrenched Garrett was. "This isn't just about Bobby anymore," David said, as he looked at the map of Garrett's movements. "This is bigger than we thought. Garrett's been running the show for decades, and no one has stopped him." Dubois nodded grimly. "We're not the first to try, David. Many have come before us, investigators, agents. But Garrett always stays one step ahead. The question is, how do we catch him without getting caught ourselves?" David clenched his jaw. "We use the same method he's used all these years. We get inside his network. We follow the money, the connections, the people he's worked with. And when we find him, we make sure he can't slip away again." David knew that this was more than just a chase. This was about justice for his grandfather, for the soldiers who had died because of Garrett's treachery, and for the countless lives Garrett had manipulated for personal gain. Over the next few weeks, David and Dubois worked tirelessly, gathering intelligence, interviewing contacts, and piecing together Garrett's shadowy network. But the closer they got, the more dangerous their situation became. Garrett's people were watching. One evening, as David was reviewing documents in a secluded safe house, his phone rang. It was an anonymous message. "Stop digging, Captain. Some secrets are better left buried. Keep pushing, and you'll be the next one to disappear." David's heart raced. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a warning. Garrett, or whoever was protecting him, was sending a clear message: stop now or face the consequences. But David was undeterred. He couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything he had learned. His grandfather had died trying to expose Garrett's betrayal. David would see it through, no matter the cost. "Whoever this is," David muttered, staring at the phone, "they can try to stop me, but they won't. I'm coming for Garrett, and I won't stop until the truth is exposed." The following day, David received an encrypted message. It was from an anonymous source inside Garrett's network. The message was simple. "Garrett is hiding in plain sight. The people who protect him are closer than you think." David's pulse quickened. The stakes had just been raised. Someone inside Garrett's circle was willing to help. But the danger was greater now. If Garrett's people found out about the leak, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone in their way. David shared the information with Dubois. They couldn't waste any time. They needed to move fast. With the help of their mysterious informant, they would finally have the evidence they needed to bring Garrett to justice. As David prepared for the next phase of their operation, he couldn't help but think about Bobby, about the sacrifices he had made, about the price of truth. The mission his grandfather had died for was finally within reach. All David had to do was stay one step ahead of the people trying to stop him. But as the clock ticked, the danger grew. Every move David made was being watched. Every step he took, he was getting closer to Garrett, and the closer he got, the more powerful and dangerous his enemies became. The safe house was silent except for the low hum of the radio, its static filling the empty space. David stared at the files in front of him, his mind racing with the weight of the situation. It was clear now, Garrett was no longer just a war traitor. He was an international shadow, manipulating events across decades. But the more David learned, the more he realized just how far-reaching Garrett's influence had been. David sat in the corner of the room, gripping the edge of the table, staring at the map of Garrett's network. The faces of those involved in the conspiracy seemed to loom over him, their secrets protected by decades of deception. Dubois had been working non-stop, reaching out to his contacts within the Belgian intelligence community. Together, they had pieced together a trail of corruption that extended well beyond Garrett, involving powerful figures who had protected him all these years. "You're sure this is it?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the final piece? The evidence that can bring him down?" Dubois looked up, his face etched with exhaustion but determination. "It's the last link we need. Garrett's network is vast, but this document, it ties him directly to the betrayal of your grandfather's mission. We're ready." David's heart raced. He could feel the pieces finally coming together. All the years of uncertainty, the endless questions, he was about to have the answers. But what would those answers cost him? And those he loved? "The document ties Garrett to the betrayal, but it's not just about Bobby," Dubois continued. "It's about everyone he's manipulated. There are more names in that file. Allies who knew the truth and chose to cover it up." David's thoughts turned to the people closest to him, the military, his family, even the intelligence community. Who had known what and when? Who had allowed Garrett to continue his operations without interference? The truth was far murkier than he had ever imagined. "I need to see that document," David said, his tone resolute. "Everything depends on it." Dubois slid the file across the table. It was thick with the weight of decades of secrets, and David opened it with careful hands. Inside was a detailed account of Operation Nightingale, everything his grandfather had been involved in. But there was more. As David read through the pages, his eyes widened. Garrett's name appeared again and again, connected to key figures in intelligence agencies, politicians, and businessmen. The scope of his betrayal was staggering, and the realization hit David like a blow. "I've spent years investigating this," David said, his voice low with disbelief. "And Garrett wasn't just betraying the Allies. He was selling secrets to everyone, working both sides, creating chaos to profit from it." Dubois nodded. "This goes beyond your grandfather's death. Garrett created an entire network of corruption that fed off international conflict. Every time nations clashed, Garrett made sure his pockets were lined." David felt a wave of anger wash over him. This wasn't just about a single betrayal. It was about decades of manipulation, lives lost, and a system built on lies. Garrett had to be stopped, and David was the one who would see it through. "There's one thing left to do," David said, his voice steady. "We have to expose him. To the world. If we release this, Garrett's entire network will unravel, and we'll finally get justice for Grandpa." Dubois hesitated. "David, there's something you need to know. The people who protect Garrett are powerful. They won't let you do this without a fight. You need to be prepared for what comes next." David knew the risks. He'd known them from the start. But he couldn't let fear stop him now. His grandfather had given his life to stop Garrett. David was about to finish what Bobby had started. The next few days were a blur of planning, strategizing, and preparing. David and Dubois worked together to make sure that the release of the document would be foolproof. Every step was calculated, every risk weighed. There was no room for error. "We're ready," Dubois said, looking at David with a mix of respect and concern. "Once we hit send, there's no going back. We have to be sure." David nodded. He had spent too long searching for answers. Too many people had been affected by Garrett's betrayal. This wasn't just about justice for his grandfather. It was about exposing a system that had allowed corruption to thrive unchecked. At the last moment, David received a message from an unknown number. It was a warning. "You think you're safe, but you're not. Garrett's people know what you're planning. If you go through with this, there will be consequences." David felt the weight of the threat, but it only made him more determined. He wasn't going to back down. He had the truth, and it was time for the world to know. Garrett's empire of lies was about to come crashing down. David looked at the file one last time before sending it. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no more room for doubt. The truth would finally be exposed. And once it was, Garrett's long reign of deception would be over. "Send it," David said, his voice unwavering. The file was sent, and David knew that his life would never be the same. There was no turning back now. Within hours, the media had picked up the story. International headlines screamed of Garrett's betrayal, his vast network, and the truth about Operation Nightingale. The world was finally learning what had been kept hidden for so long. As the story spread, David couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The danger was far from over, but for the first time in years he felt a sense of peace. His grandfather's death had meaning. The truth had won. David sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the moment. He had exposed the conspiracy that had cost his grandfather his life. But the fight wasn't over. There were still people out there who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The fight for justice was just beginning.